This is 5 Live Breakfast. It is Thursday morning. The government's latest ideas on how to stop terrorists operating in the UK will be announced today by the Home Secretary John Reid. He's hoping to get cross-party backing for a range of measures. They include an extension of the 28-day limit on holding suspects without charge and a review on whether phone tapping evidence should be allowed in court. Derek Barnett is Vice President of the Police Superintendents Association in England and Wales. Derek, good morning.
Good morning to you.
And Chris Atkins joins us, Director of Taking Liberties, a documentary released in cinemas tomorrow. Hello, Chris. Derek, phone tapping evidence, why is it so important, and why do you think it should go ahead?
Well, our members are senior investigators and they're also managers of significant resources, and they know from their own experience and from speaking to colleagues in other countries how valuable that product is, and that by not using it is as evidence is a senseless wasted opportunity.
But it's not a silver bullet, is it?
No, I'm not suggesting it is. It is a tool to assist police investigations, and it doesn't replace tried and tested methods of policing, and it's never sufficient alone to convict people, but it is a very valuable tool. But it will never replace the methods of knocking on doors, tracing witnesses, recovering evidence, analysing intelligence.
Chris Atkins, what's your problem with phone tap evidence?
Well, like a lot of these proposals that come forward, they look fine on the surface. You sort of scratch away underneath, and you start to find a few problems. I mean, my problem is actually with the authorisation of the wiretap in the first place. In all other countries where phone tap evidence is admissible, you'll find that it's a judge who authorises the wiretap. Now, in Britain, it's a politician who authorises the wiretap. So why is that? Why is it that John Reid can decide who snoops in on my phone and not a judge? And it also, like with a lot of these measures, they say that they'll bring it in to fight terrorism, and as you find, like with the extradition treaty and stop and search, they actually get use of people who couldn't be terrorists in a million years. So it sounds good.
Like whom? I mean, what are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about the extradition treaty, so where people are shipped off to America for trial without evidence. They brought that in 2003, supposedly for the war on terror. 95% of the people have been shipped off, nothing to do with terrorism at all. So my worry is that these powers will be misused against ordinary citizens and won't be used that successfully against terrorists.
Is that a concern, Derek?
Well, I think what we're talking here is about the issue of proportionality, and certainly the use of intercepts can only be approved at the highest level, as your colleague says.
But not by a judge, it's by a politician.
Well, I think that's a separate argument, but at the moment it can only be used on the authority at the highest level, which is the Home Secretary. And it can only be used for issues of national security or against serious and organised crime. And I think there is a danger sometimes that we concentrate too much on the terrorism picture and forget about the serious threat to our community from organised crime, drug barons, etc. And this is a very, very useful tool that is available to the public. And really this is an issue, I think, of transparency, because the public would expect that when the authorities have this evidence, it is better to see it being put before the courts, where it has public scrutiny, rather than lying dormant in sort of authority computer files.
Chris, you have a problem with it being used in the first place,
I just have a problem with how it gets authorised, and I keep saying,
but
why
do you acknowledge it can be valuable when we're talking about terrorists talking to each other?
It could be valuable, but terrorists never really pick up the phone to each other and say, let's go and bomb Parliament tomorrow. They always just use code words and so on and so forth. It's never that clear cut. And
hang on, is it, Derek Barnett, are there examples that this has been useful?
Our experience in this country in using some other methods of intrusive methods shows that criminals do disclose their activities, and our experience with colleagues in Europe shows that.
What about terrorists? I mean, terrorists, the appalling crime of terrorism, do they disclose their activities, or as Chris says, that they just speak in code?
I'm not so sure this morning is the time and place to discuss in detail the sort of evidence revealed, but what I can tell you that in other countries the experience is that use of this evidence is valuable, and that criminals and terrorists do use telephones.
Well, there you are, Chris Atkins. So
well, I mean, I think this is one of the smaller issues on this paper. I mean, the big shock news is that the government's going to push for 90 days again. They
want to extend 28 days
to 90. I mean, Derek, are you in favour of that?
I'm not so sure that I'm on behalf of my association, going to step into that arena. On the wider issue of stop and search, I think that we as a police service have quite extensive powers already under the terrorism legislation and under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act.
So you're not pushing for more? You're not pushing for stop and question?
We would have to be convinced of the need to extend our powers for stop and search and questioning.
So what I find really interesting is of the three things on this terrorism paper that's coming out, phone tap 90 days and stop and question, you're only in favour of one of them. You don't actually want the other two, is that right?
No, I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying is that we as an association have been pushing for a long time for the use of intercept material to be used as evidence, and that is really to us the big issue.
And one argument, of course, Derek, is that, and which some politicians at the highest level put forward, is that if we had... It goes against what you're saying, really, because if we had an extension to the 28-day limit, which I think is what John Reid is in favour of, we would not need to use phone tap evidence, and I think he's uncomfortable about using phone tap evidence.
Well, I mean, 90 days it breaks one of the oldest civil liberties of our time. It's called habeas corpus, and it's been around for about 800 years.
And these are modern times, though. Do old civil liberties, are they relevant in the dangerous times in which we live?
Well, it was pretty dangerous in the Second World War, and Churchill repealed habeas corpus very briefly during the Second World War, then gave it back as soon as he knew that the Nazis couldn't invade. And for anyone to even compare where we are now with 1940s Britain is quite clearly not well in the head. I mean, when they
it has been done by pretty senior people. You know, the threat we face is potentially a very dangerous one.
But it can't be compared with that of the Nazis, and it can't be compared with that of the Cold War. I mean, when they brought in a law called internment to try and stop the IRA in the 1970s, it was a disaster. Any politician will tell you that. It backfired completely. It acted as a recruiting sergeant. So because of the apparent injustices of people being locked up without charge and without trial, then more and more people were getting more and more upset, and it pushed people into the hands of the recruiters, which is why 90 days is it's not going to help fight terrorism, it's actually going to encourage terrorism.
Okay, let me finally, Derek, take you back to phone tapping and a text we've got here, just to address this. Phone tapping. This is not about terrorism, it's about increasing police powers and reducing civil liberties. That, Derek Barnett, from one of our listeners. What do you say to that listener?
I fundamentally disagree. I think what we're talking about here is evidence, and putting evidence before the courts, taking serious and organised criminals out of circulation and protecting the public. The issue about stop and search and detention is an issue about civil liberties, but evidence before the courts is one of transparency and protecting the public.
Thank you both. It's very nearly 7:14 and it's Thursday morning.
A lot of this morning's headline writers